Turning to those developments, this is the suspected Fort Hood gunman, 34-year-old Ivan Lopez. Authorities say he's being treated for mental illness before yesterday's shooting on post. As we take a live look at our state capitol, where the flags are flying at half-staff by order of Governor Rick Perry in tribute to the victims of yesterday's shooting. We have complete team coverage of the tragedy and its aftermath. Omar Lewis has an update on the wounded still at the hospital, but we begin with Sophia Beausoleil with the latest from Fort Hood. Sophia.
Hi, good afternoon, Brian. Well, there'll be a press conference at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and we'll learn more details on what happened yesterday during the deadly shooting. But last night, we learned from the commanding officer for Fort Hood that the suspected gunman was taking medication and was being evaluated for PTSD. Now, he was not diagnosed. And at this point, the main question is what exactly triggered off the gunman to go on such a rampage? So here's what happened. Yesterday at 4 in the afternoon, the suspected gunman went into one building, opened fire, went to a vehicle, continued to shoot, and then went into another building and fired on those here at Fort Hood. Now, authorities say that an officer, a military police officer, actually confronted the gunman, and that's when the gunman turned the gun on himself and shot himself in the head. Now, we had talked with the Killeen mayor, and we're going to hear that coming up at KXAN News at 12:30. But I know, Brian, that people have been coming and going as a normal workday with heavy hearts, just trying to get through a very tough situation. But we'll hear what the mayor has to say coming up in 30 minutes. Reporting live from Fort Hood, Sophia Beausoleil, KXAN News.
A lot of emotion from him today as well. Okay, thank you, Sophia. Our live team coverage continues now with Omar Lewis at Scott and White Hospital, where doctors upgraded the status of some of the shooting victims. That's the good news, Omar.
Doctors say there are still a total of 9 patients here at Scott and White. 3 of those patients are listed in critical condition, suffering from gunshot wounds to the neck, the spine, and the abdomen. Those 3 patients are on ventilators right now. But the good news here is that doctors say they do not expect any more fatalities. The most critical patients will be undergoing surgeries today and tomorrow. Doctors say most of the patients are awake and talking. 4 patients are listed in good condition, and they may be released from the hospital today, and 2 other patients are listed as fair. Officials say those patients with minor injuries suffered from shrapnel injuries and bullet grazes. All of these victims are military personnel, and we're told there are 8 men and 1 woman who are brought here. They range in age from 20 to 40s. All of the family members of those patients have been contacted, and doctors here have been providing them with counseling at the hospital.
There's a tremendous amount of work left to be done for a lot of these patients. I would say that in terms of life-threatening events, right now I feel pretty good for our patients.
And doctors say one of their most difficult challenges in the beginning was contacting the family members because some of these victims did not have their IDs on them. And these doctors also say that these victims will be undergoing post-traumatic stress counseling once they're well enough. For now, we're live in Temple. Omar Lewis, KXAN News.
The Army's top civilian official says the soldier accused in the Fort Hood shooting yesterday was deployed for the final months of the war in Iraq, but did not see any combat. Army Secretary John McHugh also says 34-year-old Ivan Lopez did not appear to have any connections to extremist groups. He says Lopez was examined by a psychiatrist last month, treated for a sleeping problem.
He was undergoing a variety of treatment and diagnoses for mental health conditions ranging from depression to anxiety to some sleep disturbance. He was prescribed a number of drugs to address those, including Ambien.
We're told Lopez enlisted in the Army in June of 2008 as an infantryman. He later switched his specialty to truck driver, which was his job in Iraq. A woman who lived near the suspect said she never saw any signs he was capable of such violence.
As far as I knew, he was a nice guy. He's always smiled and waved, and that's about it. Typical average family, you know. They were always coming and going, you know. They'd smile whenever they see someone, and that was it.
She says after news of the shooting broke on television yesterday, the suspect's wife came out of her apartment crying.
We were all outside talking about it, and I saw her come out of her apartment, and she seemed to be, as she was, she was worried and she was crying, and she had a little girl with her. So, I walked over to her, and, I tried to console her and comfort her and let her know everything was okay. But it didn't seem to, pretty much, sink in.
She says Lopez, his wife, and 3-year-old daughter moved into the apartment very near Fort Hood a little over a week ago. Well, President Obama spoke about the shootings with a message to the victims' families and promised a thorough investigation.
We are going to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. Any shooting is troubling. Obviously, this reopens the pain of what happened at Fort Hood 5 years ago. We know these families. We know their incredible service to our country and the sacrifices that they make. Obviously, our thoughts and prayers are with the entire community, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure that the community at Fort Hood has what it needs to deal with the current situation, but also any potential aftermath. We're heartbroken that something like this might have happened again.